Hello, everybody. Welcome to the latest edition of the Paddock Pass podcast, brought to you by KTM, Fly Racing, and Renthal Street. We're here to discuss a pretty dramatic weekend in Indonesia. And as you may notice, if you're watching us on YouTube, none of us are actually at the circuit. We're all recording this from the comfort of our own homes. Gentlemen, there is a reason for that. None of us were actually on the ground this weekend, which I think is the first time all year that at least one of us hasn't been there. But this is a one-off, isn't it, Ad?
Yes, Neil. We are in the comfort of our own homes. We're not quite in the comfort of a usual working schedule. I've also got MXGP, and I'm kind of watching it as we're talking. And Jorge Prado's just won the World Championship, so it's all kicking off at the same moment. But yeah, I mean, this is the first race I haven't been to this year, including the testing in Qatar. But yeah, I mean, still plenty to talk about, and we've been listening to the rider debriefs that have been sent through from contacts on the ground at Mandalika. And you know, if there's any sort of patrons or people who are interested in being patrons, head over to our channel there, because we've been doing our note shows every day and talking about the biggest sort of scoops and perspectives that have sort of appeared from this Grand Prix.
Yep, absolutely. Patreon.com/Paddock Pass podcast. Lots and lots of content there this weekend and in the coming weeks as well, with the packed MotoGP schedule. David Emmett, you're in the safe comfort of your own house in the Netherlands. May I ask what time you rose this morning? Did you make it up for MotoGP?
Of course I did. I always make it up for MotoGP. However, if anyone thinks I'm going to make it up for Moto3 FP1, they have another thing coming.
Moto3 race?
No, certainly not. I can watch it back later on.
That's why Colin Vaya crashed. Dave wasn't there.
Yeah, that's right. It's my fault. It's entirely my fault. I should have got up to watch him crash. No, I'm going to go up at 8:30, but again, I was. My problem is that I go to bed very, very late, so I still only end up with about 5 hours sleep.
Yeah. Well, thanks very much. And a quick shout out to Derry from Crash.net, the Indonesian correspondent, who was helping with some of the debriefs, as well as Simon Crafar. So those guys were helping to keep us informed and abreast of everything that was going on. It was a dramatic weekend that saw the championship pendulum swing once again from one rider to the other and then back again, almost by the day. I mean, we've been saying that pretty much all year, haven't we? And indeed last year too. But was it a good GP? I'm going to ask you guys for your grades. I mean, Ad, what was your opinion of this year's edition of the Indonesian Grand Prix?
I'm going to give it a 6, Neil, purely because it started in such spectacular fashion on the Wednesday with like a fans parade where you thought, it seems like half of Indonesia is packed to Lombok and the circuit is going to be ram-packed, and the passion and the way that the fans were chasing the riders around. I think even in the Hero Walk coverage we saw this morning at some earthly hour in Europe, you know, the barriers were being sort of pulled in on the riders. I mean, there was a real kind of craze for MotoGP, but then I struggled to see spectators at the circuit. The official figure was like 60,000, and I don't know if that was realistic or not. We had heard from a couple of people inside the paddock that was nowhere. That was a very ambitious figure indeed. And I just think it's a bit of a shame. I mean, why is that? Is it something to do with ticket prices? Or is Lombok just extra tricky to get to compared to, say, Sepang? I mean, that's something maybe it's a bigger question for another podcast. But yeah, that in combination with the races were good. I mean, we've seen worse ones this year, and I'm just not a fan of the track, Mandalika. It just seems such a strange layout. It just sort of weaves artificially from one sort of bend to another rather than having this sort of natural flow to it. So it's for that, I'm just going to give it a 6.
Interesting comments. Yeah, it was a slightly strange race, and just in that we had just 12 finishers. I think there was 14 last year, so it definitely was a race of attrition. We asked some of our patrons for some questions to answer on today's show, and Racing Armchair asked Dave, did everyone manage to stay awake through that? Yawn.
Bit harsh.
And I'm going to ask,
I was going to say that if you want to know my rating of the race, I think you could basically just take everything that Adam said and say the opposite, except for crowd numbers, because I disagree completely. Actually, I like Mandalika. I think the layout's really, really good. I think it has the potential for producing good racing, but it didn't. They were. I mean, the sprint race was sort of interesting in parts, but the Sunday race was extremely tedious. So I'm going to give it a 5. But that's an average of sort of a 7 for the sprint race and a 5 and a 3 for the main race on Sunday.
I can tell someone was grumpy. Someone hadn't had their coffee before the MotoGP race started. I thought it was a decent Sunday race. I thought it was interesting.
Give it a 3.
And Bastianini was, at least up until he crashed, I thought it was really interesting and had the potential to go down to the wire. I'm going to go with a 7. I don't think it was a classic, but I think there was enough strange things happening and going on through the weekend to keep it relatively interesting. And as I mentioned previously, the championship fight swinging between the two main guys was certainly interesting. Kept it on the toes. I'm going to go on to the moments of the weekend, gents. I mean, Dave, I'll start with you this time, but what was the moment and the thing that stood out that you'll take away from this weekend?
The moment for me was the turn 1 chaos, was the crashes at the back. I mean, it wasn't... Jack Miller caused it, held his hand up and said, I was the first one to crash. He said, obviously it's not doing anything dangerous or anything like that. It's just that it's such a lot of, there's sort of bikes all over the place and it gets very difficult. And he was racing Aleix Espargaro, if you like. And so he had his eye on Aleix Espargaro, and then Maverick Vinales cut across him sort of suddenly and had to slammed the brake on, locked the front, folded the front, crashed and took everyone out. But I think it's a bit emblematic because afterwards Jack was interesting. He's saying, look, the first lap, the opening lap, is the only time that we can really easily make any passes, make any difference. So everything goes into that first lap. And after that, you're pretty much stuck where you are. So I think it's sort of emblematic of where MotoGP is at the moment, where passing is extremely difficult because of all the factors we've spoken about before, the aerodynamics and the ride height devices and the effect that has on the front tyre. So yeah, that was my sort of moment, just because it was illustrative of where we are now.
Ad?
Bear with me here, but I'm gonna go for the double belch. What I mean by that is, well, firstly, there was a bit of a lack of decorum this weekend in Mandalika. Maybe the heat was something to do with it, but you had Marc Márquez drop in an F-bomb, after his sprint podium finish on Saturday, and then Pecco Bagnaia was also getting a bit mouthy in his Parc Fermé interview as well today. But the first one came from Pedro Acosta, just in that sort of delightful behind-the-scenes scenario that Dorna liked to run, where the riders are waiting behind the podium, and the way he just kind of let one rip, in a company
multiple,
of, a few were quite loud, and I thought they summed up quite nicely the predicament he was in with the tire pressure rule and how it just seems to. I mean, I think many fans who are left waiting for confirmation of the final result, or knowing that this was going on behind the scenes, probably wanted to belch as well, with the whole kind of, general state of affairs that was going on at MotoGP at the time. So there's that. And then the other one was by Marc Márquez's, GP23 engine. And if you listen to the onboard audio, there's a delightful bang and a pop, and the engine starts crackling. And then, of course, basically, again, it was symbolic of Marc's kind of very outside championship chances for 2024 going up in smoke as well. And you have to feel something for the Gresini team, because that's another engine gone, as well as, he's probably used a big quota of the spares for these overseas trips in the first Grand Prix of 5. So it's, there you go. Sorry for being a bit coarse, Neil, but those are my moments.
It was a big one with the engine. That was his sixth engine. I think he's got two. He's got two more.
Well, I'm going to plump for Jorge Martin's crash on Saturday, because we've been lauding Martin in recent weeks for saying, isn't it fantastic how he's bounced back from that crash out of the lead at the Sachsenring to just collect points when he needs to. He's a different animal this year, and he was on course on the sprint to be so much further ahead of the rest because Bastianini had a bad start. It was those two essentially that were the fastest guys all weekend. And going into turn 16 at the end of the lap, he manages to just completely dump it. And then he shrugs his shoulders in his debrief afterwards and said, I don't really know what happened. And then we got the opportunity to listen to what Pecco Bagnaia said afterwards. And he said, I was sat behind Jorge and it was never going to make the corner, not in a million years. And I just thought, okay, we've been here before, haven't we? Jorge on Indonesian soil, so much more superior to the rest, yet he just can't manage to get the job done. And I think it raised some serious questions about his bottle in this kind of crazy topsy-turvy championship fight, which we're going to come on to later in the show. And then, of course, he managed to put that right to an extent on Sunday. So fair play to Jorge for managing to turn the weekend round. And I guess that's where we should start with our talking points today, gents, because it was a really good recovery from Martin, considering how big a dent that must have given his confidence on Saturday. Yet he led from the start. He led every single lap. It was lights to flag victory. There was a little bit of jeopardy at some moments, right? But he still managed it very, very well and in an accomplished fashion. And extends his championship lead by 9 points on Sunday after it had been whittled away by 12 on Saturday.
Yeah, every time Pedro Acosta got close, then he would just up his pace again. And it was going up and down. It was also interesting to see that he was being extremely careful in turn 6. Turn 16 in that final corner. There was a few times where he was just incredibly slow through there, and it was obviously the place that he was deciding, like, this is where I'm going to leave margin because I don't want to happen. I don't want that to happen again. And he was just extremely comfortable. He was just very, very comfortable and very, very fast around there. Also, he was extremely comfortable with the medium rear tyre. That had been right from the start. That was on Friday already that Martin had shown that he was incredibly comfortable with the rear tyre. He needed with the medium rear. He could do the pace. That was where Bagnaia was struggling. And then again, Bagnaia had a really, really slow start. The first, 5-6 laps maybe, where he was doing 31s where everyone else was doing 30s. And it looked like he was on for another one of these sort of, nightmare days. But he pulled it out of the bag and had a really good race at the end. But yeah, I mean, this is incredibly good by Martin. And we've talked about Jorge Martin and neither Jorge Martin nor Pecco Bagnaia not wanting to win the championship because of all these races. So I went away and got me spreadsheets out for the lads. And what I found out was that actually it's pretty average. They're fairly normal. Once you take away, because we've been looking at this crashes per MotoGP round. And that's the wrong way to think about it. You have to think about it about crashes per MotoGP race. And 5 crashes in what have we had so far? Yesterday it was 29. It was 29 races. Now it's 5 crashes in 30 races. That's fairly average. That's the sort of failure rate that you would see in, I think, Marc Márquez's 2018 or 17 season. It's it's just bog standard. It's nothing particularly special, and it's the same with the number of points. The other way of measuring it is the number of points scored versus the maximum number of points scored. And let me just dig up my stats here. After yesterday, I haven't updated them yet, but after yesterday, he was on 64% of the maximum number of points, and in 2016 and 2017. Marc Márquez won the championship sort of convincingly enough with a comfortable margin with 66% of the maximum points. So it's not that either of these two riders are trying not to win. It's just because we've got so many race starts, you're going to have more crashes and more chances for more opportunities for disaster. And I think it's that is what's impinging on the consciousness of MotoGP fans and giving us all the impression that people are just throwing it away left, right and centre.
Neil, I don't think Dave went to sleep at all, actually, during the course of this Grand Prix. But just for my 2 cents worth, I mean, Martin was faultless. I mean, it was a really, I'm going to say a brave performance because, he must have been battling some mental demons. And I think he talked a bit about this in the post-race interview, just saying, he had ghosts sort of flying around his helmet, going through turns 10 and 11, remembering his crash from last year, which also turned the championship in a big way. And, I think he deserves immense credit for, you dropped the ball on Saturday, but then coming back in the style that he did. We can't predict the future, but I think this was a pivotal moment in this championship this year. Being able to do that at that venue, with that kind of scrutiny and pressure on him, I think it was a big, big gesture. And that is why it's also important that Bagnaia got on the podium and kept things as close as it could be. And just, in terms of entertainment stakes, I think it's fantastic that Martin can still make these errors, because you're watching him and he's so kind of formulaic and he's so consistent, but there's just that little feeling that, this kind of utter disaster or, calamity could happen. And that sort of adds a little bit of tension to every race.
I think you could say the same thing about Pecco Bagnaia as well. As brilliant and as kind of metronomic as he can be, there's always that little question mark hanging above his head as to whether he might make a bit of a boo-boo, as he has done in many times in the past. Dave, we saw Martin getting away with Acosta, and then there was a big battle for third, and Enea Bastianini eventually got past Bezzecchi and Franco Morbidelli, and then started setting some ludicrous times for such an advanced stage in the race. At one point, he was, I think, 0.5, 0.6 seconds faster than Martin, who was leading the race, and he was like cutting massive chunks out of the lead. Did Martin get off? Like, was he let off by the fact that that Bastianini crashed out with 5 laps remaining? Do you think the beast had it in him to not just catch Acosta but catch Martin as well?
I think the beast had him into pointlessly lose the front going into turn 1 because he was trying too hard. I think that the one lesson that we can learn from that is that Enea Bastianini gets too excited in situations like this and throws it away.
That's not answering the question, though, Dave.
I mean, just in terms of outright pace, it would have been close. I think he was clearly going to catch, if he hadn't have fallen off, he was clearly going to catch Acosta. Then, of course, he'd have to try and get past Acosta, which is not easy because Acosta has been shown himself to be incredibly. We saw that
especially in the sprint.
Yeah, in the sprint, he was just astonishing. He had absolutely no business being where he was, and yet there he was, holding everyone up until the second half of the sprint race, and he picked up his pace again. But yeah, he was just superb at defensive riding. So I think Bastianini would have struggled, and by that time, then it would have been too late. But in terms of pure pace, yeah, he could have caught Martin. But then again, in terms of pure pace, he was so fast that he was faster than his front tyre could bear.
It was the quintessential Bastianini performance in some respects, wasn't it, Ad? Incredibly frustrating in the opening laps where you knew he was one of the fastest guys, yet he just could not make it work. He was actually second at the end of the first lap, and then Acosta, Morbidelli and Bezzecchi all got past him. And for half the race, you're thinking, what's this guy doing? And then from nowhere, it just comes, and he looks absolutely unstoppable, but he's frustrating in the sense that he's so far from being complete. There are so many rough edges to his game, and he hasn't really managed to iron those out in the last couple of years when you would have expected him to.
Yeah, that's right, Neil. And this possibly could be his best chance to get near a championship. I mean, he's riding the best bike in the best team. Next year he's going to a little bit more of what's so far been an unstable package. But yeah, I mean, we said yesterday, I think, in our note show that Bastianini just doesn't do the job in the opening stages of the race, and he had the start, he had the possibility, like you say, just really couldn't put the whole sort of thing together. It sounds like such a cliche, but in Bastianini's case, it's true. And instead of riding like a bastard, he was just a bastard on this occasion.
Yeah, exactly. He lacks the ruthlessness. I mean, the real problem is he lacks that sort of killer instinct. He can sort of, if you like, he fancies a fight, but he never finishes it, which is his biggest problem. If he actually,
are you saying he's a gobshite?
I'm not saying anything about MotoGP riders because they earn more money than me, and they're younger and stronger and more likely to, punch me in the nads, which would not be good for anyone.
Apart from us.
Yeah, well, yes, apart from you, who'd get to stand around and laugh. No, but I mean, look, he is clearly immensely talented, and on his day, he can do all sorts of things. But there's just those final little bits and bobs that is the difference between a champion and a winner. He's clearly a winner. He's proved that, and you see this. You can really see the difference between Bagnaia and Martin. They have that cold steel in their look. You can see when they're talking about it, they're just obsessed with making this thing work, and they find a way to make it work.
Can I just concur there, a little bit with Dave, because in contrast, Bagnaia is somebody who's completely in sync with a motorcycle. Bastianini took trouble, of course, last year. I mean, he had his injury problems too, but trying to make so that the GP23 work for him, the same problems that sort of like Marco Bezzecchi's had this season. In contrast, you could see today, I thought Bagnaia gave a fantastic example of how he's able to use all the attributes of the GP24. I mean, the move on Morbidelli was a perfect case in point. There is somebody, a world champion at the peak of his powers, but also completely in sync with the bike. Yeah, Neil, you say he's prone to really bizarre mistakes and errors, but then on the other hand, I think he can produce magic, and he's probably operating at a consistently higher level than anybody else in the class at the moment, because Martin was perfect today, but then it was his first Grand Prix win since May in France. So maybe we can talk about this later, but in terms of tipping for the championship, I still lean more towards like the defending number one at the moment.
Well, we're gonna mention Pedro Acosta soon, but while we're mentioning Bagnaia, Dave, it was a strange race from him. It was almost like Emilia Romagna, wasn't it? In that he wasn't able to get going for the first couple of laps, and then mid-race distance we started seeing fastest laps coming in, and in the end it was a pretty accomplished performance. We saw from Friday morning, I think the writing was on the wall. This was going to be a tricky weekend for Pecco. It wasn't going to be I'm going to win both the sprint and the Sunday race. I think at that early stage he thought this might be a bit of a damage limitation job, considering just how fast Martin and Bastianini were, and to come away winning the sprint and then to go through the field in kind of typically understated fashion towards the end. I thought it was a really good weekend on what was a tricky track.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like I said, Bagnaia was really struggling with the medium tyre on Friday. He sorted it out on Sunday, but I think he needed that tyre to come in. I'll talk about it a little bit later when we talk about the way that he passed Bezzecchi. But he was to come away having gained. He's gained on Jorge Martin. Sure, it's only 3 points, but it was a very, very important. It was a very, very important 3 points. The big problem for him was the start. He got an absolutely horrible start, and I think he said this is the fifth race in a row where it's happened. And the problem is the carbon clutch which they use. It's very, very aggressive. The reason you use a carbon clutch is just purely because of the weight. It keeps the weight down. And they only really use the clutch for the start. The rest of the time, once the clutch is engaged, that's it. You're using the seamless gearbox to shift up and down. So there's no use for that. And then it has a role in engine braking. It's a slipper clutch. And so when you're actually braking, it'll lift just a little bit to allow a small amount of mechanical clutch slip going into corners. But yeah, it's very limited use, and so you're using these carbon discs because they're much lighter. You've got much less rotating mass, and that makes the whole bike easier to turn, and a whole bunch of other things. But it is extremely aggressive, and it's just the way that it's biting is so basically from the moment you release the clutch to the moment it starts to grab. That's the real problem for him, getting to dose the power in smoothly. That's causing him the problem, and he lost a lot of ground there. He also, I think, but I'm not sure. I saw his rear he sort of wheelied, and then his rear span very quickly, and then bit again, and all that is really bad for your tire as well. It doesn't get it going closely, and it wasn't until later in the race that you really saw him come into his own. And this was Marco Bezzecchi had some really, really good explanations about the difference between the GP23 and the GP24. The GP24, and this is, I've been wrong about the GP24 before. It's completely counter to what I thought about the GP24. I thought it can use the rear tyre better, but where it's using the rear tyre better is actually on corner entry. The GP24 has a little bit less rear grip, and so you can actually sort of brake more smoothly into the corner and slide the bike better. So as the race goes on, then the bike comes into its own, so you can actually slide the rear to help turn the bike. It doesn't overpower the front quite so much because you don't have so much grip. But then that made overtaking Marco Bezzecchi very, very difficult, because Bezzecchi with the GP23 has got a little bit more drive grip coming out the corner. But that's what's causing the GP23 riders problems, because he's pushing the front. All this extra rear grip is actually pushing the front on braking and causing problems. That was basically why it took Bagnaia such a long time to actually get past. But when he did get past, it was just a very impressive performance.
Yeah, and I loved how he engaged the ride-out device to get past Bezzecchi at that particular run down to turn 10. He said afterwards that normally you're coming out of that corner with a bit of an angle, but he kind of nailed his line to the extent that he was completely upright, and he thought, you know what, I can just engage this to lower the bike and get past. So yeah, great stuff from Bagnaia, and another really assured performance on what promised to be a difficult weekend. And before we go on to our next talking point, Ad, do you have a word from our sponsors?
Not really a word about our sponsors, that's for sure.
A word about our sponsors.
Yeah, I mean, thanks to KTM, they back in the podcast since the beginning of the year. A full gamut of motorcycles, as people will know, from off-road to adventure bikes to naked bikes, sport bikes as well. They're going to have a big presence, I think, at the EICMA show this year. So if you habitually go to that sort of motorcycle salon in Milan, then head there, because I think you'll see absolutely everything that KTM will have to offer in the next year or two. Fly Racing, 25 years, as we've been saying on the podcast. If you're into off-road riding, they have all sorts of gear, really good quality, some innovative stuff as well with the Boa Fit system. The helmet, the Formula S, is the one I wear to ride off-road. It's easily the best ventilated, the best fitting, and has some fantastic safety features inside it as well. And then, of course, if you do have a street bike, we hope that most of the people listening to this do have one, then check out Renthal.com for any excellent accessories you might want to apply, not just bars, but all sorts of things. Just look at Renthal.com, and yeah, there's a treasure trove of stuff there.
Nicely said, Ad. As I mentioned previously, we asked some of our Patreon followers to send in some questions regarding this Grand Prix. We normally do this on our Wednesday discussion show, but because of logistics and the fact that I'll be traveling out to Asia, I think we might not be able to do it this week. So we're answering a few of your questions today, just after the GP. James OR asks, is it just a 2-horse race for the championship, Dave?
Yes. I mean, and it's quite simple. We've talked about Enea Bastianini's shortcomings. That's why he's not going to be able to catch them. The gap is 75 points. There are, 5 races left, and I can't do the mental arithmetic, but something like 174 points off the top of my head left. A 75-point gap is a big gap. Really, he would. I mean, basically. If Bastianini wanted to win the championship, then what he would need is for Pecco to take Martin out, for them both to sort of fracture their wrist and both miss 2 races. And that seems improbable. Martin and Bagnaia are so focused, so absolutely on this championship battle that I don't think there's any room for it. And again, Marc Márquez and his amazing exploding engine, that took him out, that cost him, costly points. It wouldn't have been, he would have finished behind Bagnaia and Martin, so he would have lost ground to them again. But this was a lot of points that he was missing, and so yeah, he's out as well. So yes, 2 riders left.
Do you agree, Ad?
Yeah, there's not much more to add. I think Marquez, he will be. There's kind of an adverse effect here, because now he's sort of out of it. I mean, of course, mathematically not. I do wonder if he's going to go on a little bit more of a rampage. I don't believe for a second there was maybe 1% of his mentality that might have thought, okay, we got a chance with the championship here. But he's been talking about 2024 as a transition role into 25 forever. So I don't believe it was a realistic goal. But just think of the tracks coming up now. I mean, Phillip Island, Valencia. I mean, he could really be just a guy who's been doing what he's been doing all year and mixing things up in the sort of the fight for the podium and taking points away from people. It's good that he's riding a Ducati because he doesn't have to be affiliated to anybody. You guess, if it did come down to hard brand or team orders, then you would probably be favouring Bagnaia more than Martin. But that juiciness is still to come.
Absolutely, certainly is. We always ask our patrons to vote for the rider of the Grand Prix after it is finished, and some interesting results today. 43% of you thought it was Jorge Martin, who was the rider of the Indonesian GP. 44%, however, plumped for Pedro Acosta, the rider that finished second. I like this comment from Martin Darlington. How's it going, Martin? He said, Jorge won the Sunday race and showed tremendous pace and determination, yet Pedro Acosta rode to a second place that never looked under threat and made the other KTMs pedestrian in comparison. No one really expected that from him, whereas someone expected Martin's performance from one of the two strongest title contenders. So, amazing ride from Acosta, equaled his best result in MotoGP to date, his fourth podium of the year as well. Did any of us see this coming, honestly, before Sunday's race?
I mean, he had a strong race on Saturday, but not strong enough that you would think, because there were periods where you thought, he might even make this. He kept on closing Martin down, and every time he got sort of like within about 3/4 of a second, then Martin would really have to push to open it up to a second again. But yeah, it was an outstanding race, and someone has just sent me a message saying that Pedro Acosta had a new frame. So I am wondering if this, he was saying, like, we've got this new thing which is helping us go a bit faster. We didn't know what it was, but it turns out if it was a new chassis, then yeah, that would help. That would make a big step forward. It also means that we've got the KTM look like they've got a bit of a Honda problem, if you like, when Marc was riding for Honda, where there was one rider who was really good and they just focused everything on that. Pedro is showing up everyone else on a KTM, not just his teammate, but Brad Binder, the KTM's golden boy. He's really a lot faster than Binder, and he's a lot faster than Jack Miller. So he's clearly the coming thing. And it was nice to see a podium without three Ducatis on.
It was indeed, even if there was a little bit of a dark cloud over his podium. We couldn't really celebrate that in true style because he was obviously being investigated for possible irregular tyre temperatures or tyre pressures. We'll come on to that a little bit later on in the show. But Pedro at one point got Martin's lead down to about half a second. And there was a little moment where I thought he could just maybe get close enough to make a move here. In the end, that never came to pass. But I think it shows once again, like we saw in Aragon with the new track surface, when we go to a place where MotoGP riders and MotoGP factories, i.e. Ducati, don't have a million years and a million tests worth of experience. Acosta shows just on raw talent what he can do when the playing field is leveled ever so slightly more compared to somewhere like Misano or Mugello. So yeah, what I want to ask you is, with tracks coming up which we don't visit that regularly, do you think this could be another occurrence at Motegi, for example, or Phillip Island?
I think above all, Neil, it's just like Dave was hinting, it's refreshing not to see the whole field filled with Ducatis. But I mean, if Bastianini had managed to keep his head on, then you would have to probably look at maybe another top three. I mean, Bagnaia probably wouldn't have come close to Acosta as well. But again, like Dave said, I think the fact that he's sort of supplanted Brad Binder as the guy who's able to get the maximum out of that RC16 package at the moment is a tremendous credit, not only to his ability, but also for Paul Charathan and the whole team around him to be able to harness the strengths of that motorcycle when it's very difficult to do that this season. Dave was mentioning the message about the frame, and Acosta was being very vague this weekend by saying that they managed to sort out some parts on the motorcycle that helped in some way, but they were still trying to work out the full strengths of those changes. I mean, it barely made sense, but I guess if he was trying to refer to something new, then that was it. But I'd be surprised a little bit if, KTM brought a new frame out to Mandalika for the flyaways, and they also didn't equip the Red Bull KTM team with it. But I mean, things are changing around in that operation, and we saw confirmation that Francesco Guidotti is stepping away from being Red Bull KTM Factory Racing team manager after, well, what will be 3 years in the role. I guess we'll be seeing a confirmation of who's stepping in the coming days, but that's one sizable shakeup. For my opinion on it, I don't think Francesco is necessarily a victim of the lack of success. Maybe there is something to do with that this season, but it's more KTM again trying to refine how they work and how to get the best of what they have, because this season they haven't been able to work out how to use the 24 Michelins. I mean, the guy at Ducati who has pushed the buttons and sorted out the electronics to get rid of the vibration and the chronic sort of issues that the other manufacturers have been having deserves a medal.
Yeah, I mean, and that was another thing. The vibration in that they were having, that I think in one of the MotoGP Unseen videos when they were in the car, one of the riders was saying to the other, "Yeah, I saw Acosta. He had really bad vibration," which was, very, very interesting. He didn't seem to have it on that. It was interesting to me that Acosta thanked the test team specifically in Parc Ferme, saying so, which to me means, yeah, right, we've had lots of new parts, and I'm sort of wondering. I mean, obviously, the big rumor, we're waiting for it to be confirmed. The big rumor is that Aki Ayo is going to take over as the team manager, and you also wonder, Acosta is coming from Ayo's team. You're wondering if he thinks, you know what, I would like to work with Ayo again. KTM have massive faith in Aki Ayo. Obviously, he's incredibly competent. Whether all of this, they're trying to put together that little magic team again to give themselves a chance.
Yeah, Acosta's achievement, to give it some perspective, this year's race was 16 seconds or nearly 16 seconds faster than the 2023 race. And to show what he's up against, he was basically a lone KTM in a sea of Ducatis. This was Ducati's 12th win in succession in MotoGP, which is a new record for their brand. And it's also the first time a manufacturer has won 12 straight MotoGP races since Honda did so at the start of 2014, including Marc's incredible 10 in a row run. So for Acosta to be in the middle of that, I think speaks volumes of his brilliance and his talent. And yeah, I'm looking forward to hopefully seeing a few more of those performances a little later in the year. Before we go on to winners and losers, gents, it was a welcome return to the front for Marco Bezzecchi. Where has this guy been all year? I mean, there was a few hints of it at Misano when he qualified on the front row, but yeah, this was Bezzecchi fighting back at the front and in the running for a podium. Great to see. What was the kind of the reason behind that ad?
Yeah, better late than never. I think we assumed his competitiveness at Misano was because it was his home track and he could probably ride there with, a strapping over one eye. But yeah, this was much more like it, Neil. And this is the kind of rider that we thought we were going to be seeing, at the beginning of this season. In terms of reasons for that, hard to put a finger on it. But Bezzecchi coming into good form at the point where he's about to jump off the Ducati and have to get into the mess that is Aprilia at the moment.
Yeah, I think it's just them having the bike sorted. Also, Bezzecchi was using the soft front, and he said he had to use the soft front because as I was talking about, the Michelin rear pushes the front, and the way to stop that on the GP23 is to use a tyre with more grip, even though he had less stability under braking, and that worked for sort of half the race until the grip until the grip of the front went away, and he did well. And I think that his team are sort of figuring out a final few things. Bezzecchi's figuring out a final few things, and he's sort of coming good just in time to jump on the Aprilia.
Okay, gents. Well, it's time to go on to my favorite part of the show. Also, everyone's favorite part of the show: winners and losers.
I'm glad you weren't saying Fantasy League, Neil.
No, that is off the agenda and will be for the rest of the year after Enea Bastianini completely cocked up my team and my gamble for the weekend. It was, 6-7 laps away from being an inspired move, and well, he crushed my hopes. So if I've been pretty harsh on Bastian this show, then you know the reason why. But we're going to go for the winners first of all. Dave, I'm going to start with you.
Oh, the winner to me is KTM because they've given Pedro Acosta the tools that he needs, and he's proved that he can be competitive with this bike. Now, I mean, I think it's going to be really hard for him to actually win a race before the end of the season, just because it's going to be really hard for anyone to win a race before the end of the season. Someone who isn't either Jorge Martin or Pecco Bagnaia. But it gives them, I mean, they have to take a lot of real hope this year or for next year from what Acosta is doing, looking and planning and working for 2025, and you've got to think that he's going to be really mixing it up at the front next year. So I think KTM also, it's been a pivotal weekend because they have just announced that Francesco Guidotti is leaving. We're waiting for the name of the new team manager. That's going to be important for them. So it felt like this was a weekend where they made a step forward.
Ad, how about you?
My winner, Neil, pretty easy. I had Pedro Acosta down for reasons we've already talked about. I'd also like to say MotoGP in Indonesia. And if there was some way that Dawn or the promoter could transfer all that buzz from Wednesday's pre-event into the circuit and show it to us, even
ticket prices.
Yeah, that's it. I don't know what it is. I don't know how you...
It's just ticket prices. Basically, the general admission tickets is a week's wage, which is too much.
And accommodation and travel. Yep. Lombok's not that easily accessible.
Yep.
There you go.
But yeah, I agree with you, Ad. We're going to the country with arguably the biggest support of MotoGP, maybe there in Spain. And there should be 120,000 people at a track in Indonesia. I think there's absolutely no question about that when you see some of the enthusiasm outside the track, especially in that rider parade that you mentioned on the Wednesday. My winner is, it's a pretty simple one, but I think this is just going to be a really big weekend for Pecco Bagnaia in the fact that it was really potentially tricky, and he came away with 3 points more than Jorge Martin, managed to whittle the championship deficit down to 21 points when it was 24, and just put everything together in that kind of way that Bagnaia does. And we've seen over the last 2 seasons, when we get to this flyaway stage of the year, he's the rider that blinks last, and I think we saw the first indications of that in a tricky weekend when lots of people were making mistakes. He managed to keep his head, won the sprint in a 3rd place, maybe against the odds somewhat on Sunday. So Bagnaia for me.
Neil, do you still think he's going to be the champion? If you had to put your €5 on it,
he would still get my vote. Yeah, just because he's been there and he's done that.
No, Jorge Martin's going to win the championship.
I question his bottle, Dave. I just think in really big crunch moments, he isn't quite there, the full package, whereas Bagnaia has proven in the last 2 years that he can completely keep his head in the highest possible stakes moment.
Yeah, but I think he's got a 21-point advantage, and that's enough for him to cover the shortcomings that he has. I think he's done enough in the first half of the year.
Even though he seems like a very nice chap, I'm kind of glad that Bastianini's kind of ruling himself out of the running for being MotoGP World Champion, because an immense rider, but I don't think he'll be eminently promotable, as kind of the face of MotoGP, especially as
the global face of it.
Yeah, the Liberty Media era, having a sort of, world champion who can barely string together a couple of sentences, and doesn't quite know the gender of his partner, obviously he's not going to be a great look.
Yeah, imagine trying to write up that champion's press conference and make it into some kind of readable article. I'm glad that I'm not going to have to do that. I have to say, gents, as always, when there's a winner, there's a loser. And Ad, who is your loser of the Indonesian GP?
Firstly, me, after I formally announced my kind of ejection from the Alpine Stars Fantasy League on our note show, Neil. Thanks to Alpine Stars, by the way, for backing that competition. I'm no longer in the running, and I was never in the running. But after some sort of jiggery pokery by Dave behind the scenes with the coding of my profile on MotoGP.com, I've now been ruled out. So there's that factor. But other than that, I'm going to have to say Miguel Oliveira and Aprilia, because what looked like a scary crash due to a possible malfunction with his traction control, a wrist injury, then it was a fractured wrist, and then it was multiple fractures that we're hearing now. He's already flown back to Europe, I think, for surgery. That looks like it could be the end of his season, potentially. Also the end of his stint with Trackhouse and the Italians before he jumps on the Yamaha. So it doesn't really get much worse than that in terms of a Grand Prix weekend. But also the Aprilias just seem to be so in such a state that sort of their capitano and a guy who's sort of phasing out could arguably be on the beach already. So it's a difficult situation at the moment.
Div?
Well, first of all, I want to defend myself from these accusations of hacking, because look away now, non-geeks, because all I'm doing is typing in a few commands into a bash shell, and then people think that I'm sort of launching an all-out nuclear war or something. It's nothing like that at all.
Why is there a red flashing light then when you're doing it?
And it's on his glasses, so it's kind of like making it look extra evil.
Yeah, that's right. Me stroking a little white cat. Yeah, no. My loser, my loser is actually MotoGP, because of the absolute chaos with the tyre pressure penalties. Pedro Acosta, when he crossed the line, they came in and announced that there was going to be an examination of his tyre pressure penalties. Now, actually, on the live feed, Simon Crafar had a really good explanation of the entire process of what they go through, because there's two tyre pressure sensors. They're logged from both. There's the official sensor, and that's the one that they do, and they go down with a incredibly precise manual pressure meter to measure the pressure and then calibrate it against the measured pressure and work all the rest of it out. But it later came out that the problem was that Pedro Acosta had a leaking front rim, which can happen. The rims are made as light as possible, but that also makes them quite vulnerable to damage. Now, determining that it's a leaking rim takes a lot of time, and so it took a long time before we actually found out that Pedro Acosta was going to keep his podium. I understand why we have the tyre pressure rules. I understand that you really want to be as thorough as possible in checking everything. And, look, they're doing their job and they're doing it well. It's just that it looks absolutely terrible. It looked really, really stupid.
And it's, I think Matt Oxley made this point, but couldn't Michelin have been forced to introduce a new front tire for 2025 like it was originally intended? Because a new front tire comes in and then we don't have these issues because the front tire is more resistant to the aero and the ride height devices and the extra forces that are being put on it.
The tire isn't ready yet because it hasn't been tested enough.
But shouldn't they have been given when this isn't a new issue and this has been going on for the last couple of years?
Yes,
shouldn't
it's been going on since 2020. I mean, like literally.
But shouldn't they have been sat down in a room and said, "Look, this has to come in. We'll put on extra tests for it."
It's the factories. The factories don't want to do the extra tests. They want, when they're at a test, they want to test their stuff. Testing a tyre doesn't make them any faster. They don't care if the racing is boring or it looks stupid. They just want to win. All they want is the big poster of the champion and the number one and all the rest of it. So they don't care. I'm going to say, once again, it's all Ducati's fault with their ride height devices and the aero. And yes, in an ideal world, you would introduce a new front tyre, but you can't just introduce You can't introduce a new front tyre where the design of the front tyre isn't even decided yet, where it isn't even finished yet, because you might turn up at somewhere like Mugello and find out the thing isn't working and it's starting to let go and delaminate. And then what do? Cancel the entire weekend. It takes a lot of testing. A front tyre. I've had a front tyre pop on me. It's the most terrifying experience. It was only on a 125, and I was doing about 110 kilometers an hour. So it wasn't exactly brake. But what happens is the front just goes, and the bars are wobbling around like crazy, and it goes. That was what they have been worried about. That's what Michelin have been worried about with this tyre, and this is why you need to test a front tyre. If a rear goes, I mean, we saw it when Michelin first came in. We saw both, I think, Loris Baz and Scott Redding have a catastrophic failure on the rear tyre, and yes, they crashed, but it wasn't an ugly crash. It wasn't. Well, Baz's was quite nasty because he was going down the front straight at Sepang. But having a front go is just an absolutely horrifying experience.
And just very briefly, what was the situation? Initially, it was said that Binder and Nakagami weren't going to find out if their penalties were actually a thing until Motegi. Yet then suddenly we were told, okay, no penalty for Binder, penalty for Nakagami. What was the situation there? Do we know?
I mean, I don't know. All I know is that they managed to get through the data. I mean, they did the whole validation thing. They figured it all out, and they got the penalty punished. And it's much better. You need to have the penalty or not on the day of the race. You can't keep on dragging it on forever.
Poor Taka.
Yeah.
Exactly. Just when he had got 11th place. So yeah, things not going well. My for what it's worth, my loser is the Repsol Honda team, because this was actually a weekend in which there was promise for Honda as a whole. Johan Zarco had a really strong weekend, had a great qualifying, came through Q1, qualified 7th, finished 8th in the sprint, 9th in the feature race. And both Marini and Mir were saying all weekend that yes, there's genuine, tangible improvements from the aerodynamics updates that we got, the Misano test and the new swing arm. And obviously, Marini was taken out in the first lap, or crashed on the first lap, trying to avoid that Miller crash, and Mir then crashed out later as well. So I feel like it was a bit of a missed opportunity for the Repsol Honda team when Zarco actually managed to have Honda's best result of the entire year. How far the mighty have fallen when a 9th place is being celebrated for HRC. But that's the situation of the world in 2024. We're going to pretty much wrap up. But Dave, we asked our patrons for some predictions before, I think it was on Friday. How did they do?
It was interesting. Nobody got the sprint winner right. A lot of people were predicting Jorge Martin, but then of course Jorge Martin went and ruined it on the first lap. We had 5 people who correctly predicted that Pecco Bagnaia would win the race on Sunday. That was Adam Cole, Graham Pawson, Ricardo Rundervoort, Craig Stanion, and Richard Eriksson. There was, we also asked what was the biggest disappointment. The disappointment was a bit difficult to judge. There was Enea Bastianini and Marc Márquez. KTM Aprilia people were saying, but I think it's a bit difficult to say because Marc Márquez's disappointment. His engine went pop. Not a lot you can do about it. KTM's hardly a disappointment because Acosta was on the podium. Maverick Vinales had a good weekend. Enea Bastianini had a fantastic weekend, and until he crashed. So I'm going to rule that a no score. And then in terms of dark horse, Dan Lambert said Pedro Acosta, which I think is a very, very good shout. Acosta, you wouldn't have really thought he was going to get on the podium there. Graham Pawson said Enea Bastianini, which I think, okay, fair enough. It's a little bit difficult. I think Bastianini, it's a bit hard to be a dark horse when you won a race recently. So
and you're riding the best bike for the best team.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think it's a bit tricky being unless it's 2011, riding a factory Ducati is not going to really make you a dark horse, is it?
Yeah.
Those were our predictions.
Yes, we also asked what was the earliest time Dave was going to get up. Lynn Bigg said he doesn't go to bed, which I think is probably quite accurate. It certainly seems that way. Well, gents, it's going to be a quick turnaround. We have the Japanese Grand Prix coming up. I'm going to be flying Monday evening, 5 weeks away from home, but very excited about the trip. First time in Japan. And as always, we'll be coming to you on Thursday with our first edition of the Paddock Notes show from Motegi. So you'll want to get signed up on Patreon and be sure to catch all of our note shows from the Japanese GP. Patreon.com/Paddock Pass podcast. So I'm going to say goodbye for now. Goodbye, Dave. Goodbye, Ad. Thanks very much for your company.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
And see you very soon, listener. And maybe not see you, but we'll be coming at you very soon once again for the show. But until then, goodbye.